and I will answer those to the best of my ability as we go forward. Okay, I'm going to start. Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Busy Riley. I think most of you know that. I think I know all of you so far. I wanted to talk to you about hormones because we all have a lot of time on our hands right now, or most of us have a lot of free time on our hands right now. Thank God I'm not an accountant. Trying to make the best of the time that I have and realizing that I spend so much time talking about hormones with people of all different ages in my practice. And I don't know that I'll ever call myself an expert in anything, but I would definitely say that I spend 80% of my time working on people's hormones. Joanne's asking me a quick question to get on this page. Go to the event and look in comments. I'm live, right? I think. Okay. So what we're going to do today is a couple of things. We're going to review some basics of the hormonal cycle, just like the basic. If you have a 28-day cycle, technically, what does that look like? How do I know when I'm ovulating? That kind of thing. And then we're going to move into, as we get into our 40s, why do our menstrual cycles tend to become absolutely wackadoodle? I'm going to try not to use the F word during this discussion, but I probably will drop it a couple of times because hormones make us do that sometimes. And I am learning as I get into my 40s to embrace my cycle a little bit more, even though I'm still kind of a victim to it. And those of you who know me well know that I definitely change a lot with my cycles, but I think it's important to empower ourselves by understanding a little bit better. And there's a reason why things change a lot in our 40s and as we kind of get closer to menopause. And if we have time, we'll get in a little bit into that menopausal transition. The main thing that I want to put out there, and the thing that I think is the most important for people to understand, is that no two menstrual cycles are the same. And it's important to honor that because we all have this idea in our mind like, oh, it's supposed to be exactly 4 weeks and we bleed this many days, and everybody is so different. And I'm 15 years now in practice seeing that like really everybody is so different. And so you have to navigate that on an individual basis, but hopefully there are some basic concepts that will be helpful to you guys. And then the other thing I'm seeing as I'm navigating the sort of perimenopausal time frame with people more, which means like between 45 and 55, as you're getting closer to menopause, as you make that change. Just that there are a lot of things, little nuances, and it's a lot of trial and error. You do one thing, things can get better, and then after a while, things can shift again, and then you have to adjust again. So it's kind of like this magical dance that you have to do. But I think that if you can dive in there and understand it, it really, really helps. I'm going to send one more message here because people are trying to figure out how to get on there, which obviously I didn't even know how to get on there. Okay. So the first thing that I want to talk to you about is a basic menstrual cycle. So there are 2 phases of the cycle that we think about. Let's talk about it as if it's a 4-week cycle, even though realistically most women's cycles aren't exactly 28 days. But the main thing to understand is that there are these 2 phases of the cycle. And I can't tell if I'm reversed when you guys are looking at me, so I'm going to try to do this left to right. First phase is basically the phase during which estrogen, so you have your period, you shed your uterine lining, which we will talk about, your estrogen levels start to increase, and the estrogen is causing the lining of your uterus to grow thicker. And we call that proliferation. And that's what estrogen really does. It causes cells to divide and grow and divide and grow and divide and grow. And it does this everywhere in the body, but especially in the uterus. So the whole idea for us until we stop having a period is that we are baby making machines, right? Like if we think of ourselves as cave women or just like as animals, basically, that's really what our menstrual cycle is about. And it's important to remember that because we can kind of become slaves to our genetics in that way. So the uterine lining builds up. Middle of the cycle is when you ovulate. So what happens is your ovaries will actually release an egg, and the egg's job obviously is to travel down into the uterus. If it meets with a sperm and you have the joining of those 2 things, it can implant in that nice now thickened uterus. So second half of the cycle is about that egg comes out, the follicle that released that egg starts to make progesterone. Progesterone is about solidifying and making that uterine lining really healthy so that if the embryo is implanted, it has a nice nourishing place to live. That is what it is all about. If there is no implantation and the subsequent hormones aren't produced from that, when your progesterone levels drop off, the lining sheds. That's what your period is. Your period is literally the lining that you've built up coming out so that you can start the cycle all over again. I'm going to show you this picture and I encourage you guys to bring this up. So here you can see follicular phase. This is estrogen, 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 estrogen building up. Then you have the egg released here. This is so unscientific that I'm holding this over my head. Egg is released, and then this other line here is progesterone. You see how progesterone is peaking in the second half of the cycle, right in the middle of that second half. So we typically say like day 21 to 23. So this is why when people come into me and they say, my hormones are imbalanced, I need to get blood testing, and they're here like on this day, I say, no, we're not going to test your hormones today, because if we looked at your progesterone on, like, let's say day 10 of your cycle, most people's progesterone would be almost nothing, because you don't make progesterone until that second half of the cycle. So it's a really important thing to understand, because especially with hormone testing, and I think I blab about this all the time, and I know some people love hormone testing, 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 testing. I don't think it's necessary as a first step for most menstrual issues, and sometimes I will recommend it, but most of the time you can address issues with the menstrual cycle that are before menopause without doing blood work. So unless I really want to confirm, like, is someone ovulating at all? People that have really wackadoodle irregular cycles, people with PCOS, if I want to confirm that someone's ovulating because we can't tell they're bleeding all the time, they're hardly bleeding, I will test progesterone here on day 21. I hope you guys can see this. Am I doing this right? Yeah, okay. Day 21, because day 21 is typically when progesterone will peak. So remember, ovulation, the egg is released, progesterone starts to be produced from that follicle that released the egg. And then what happens at the end of the cycle is that progesterone, if there's no implantation, so that sperm and egg did not come together and implant in the wall of the uterus. I know this is like super basic biology, but then the progesterone levels will slowly decrease. And it's basically the dropping off of the progesterone that triggers the lining to be shed. So this is important to understand, because a lot of people have issues during this last 7 to 10 days of the cycle. And that's really what we're going to be focusing on, because most people's complaints happen during this time. For a lot of us, what happens is that progesterone, if we think about it, is relaxing and nourishing and calming. And a lot of us are not making enough progesterone as we get into our 40s, and there are a lot of reasons for that. So one of the most important things to think about, so there's another image on here that's like ridiculously complicated that looks like this. And the basics, the most important thing that I want you to get from this, and I'm going to try and draw on this right-handed, even though I'm not right-handed. Okay, so the most important thing to get out of this is, here's cholesterol. So cholesterol is fat, right? All of our hormones that we think about, estrogen, progesterone, even cortisol, testosterone, DHEA, they're all built from fat, okay? So that's one of the reasons why it's important to not have too much cholesterol or damaging cholesterol, but cholesterol is really important. I don't like it to be a bad word, because cholesterol is just fat, and it's really, really important for us to build hormones from that. So basically, the important hormones that we're going to look at here are, here's progesterone. So progesterone is made pretty directly from cholesterol. And then a lot of other things are made from progesterone, the most important of which is cortisol. So those of you who have seen me here in my clinic, we talk a lot about cortisol, because cortisol is your stress hormone. It's like your day-to-day get up and go, meet the demands of your day, be able to wake up in the middle of the night and tend to a crying baby, be able to like work all day and then get home and handle driving your kids to sports, or making a dinner or working out or whatever those things are. You know, our bodies, I think, are really designed to work in a little bit of a different fashion from how we have been operating. And one of the things I think is really fascinating about this kind of forced downtime that we've had for a lot of us is, I actually think a lot of us are returning a little bit more to our natural stress cycle. So I'll try not to spend too much time on that, but it's important to remember, because if your stress demands are high, so for a lot of us in our 40s, we are sandwiched between aging parents, raising our kids, working hard. A lot of us start to struggle with our stress hormone production because the demand is so high. And guess what that takes away from? Our progesterone levels. So if we go back to this previous image of our menstrual cycle, and we're talking about, why do I feel so absolutely shitty right before my period? It's because there's not enough progesterone to nourish that part of your cycle. And so one of the ways that you can handle that, I mean, you can directly add progesterone, and sometimes we do that. as a naturopath, my goal is to work up that ladder of intervention. And what that means is I don't jump to the most invasive tool first, even though I use a ton of hormones in my practice. But it's really important to remember that there are other ways of nourishing that progesterone production that can help kind of nourish that transition from cycle to shedding your lining and having your period. There are a lot of herbs that can help balance that transitional period. So, common PMS. So, just to reiterate again, that stress hormones are built directly from progesterone, right? Cholesterol makes progesterone. Progesterone is a feeder for cortisol and stress hormones. So that connection is so important as we start talking about transitioning into that like perimenopausal phase. Because, you know, it's really a perfect storm as women start to approach menopause that our lives become extremely busy, especially because it's a little more common for people to have kids a little bit later these days. So typically as we're approaching the age of 50, a lot of us have teenagers that we're trying to launch. A lot of us are at the peak of our career. So we're like basically living two full-time lives at the same time. Any questions about that? Please feel free to type in the comments. I'm going to try to stay on top of this to make sure I'm being clear. So what I wanted to talk about then is what does that look like as we move towards menopause? So menopause literally means the cessation of a period, and we define that by either 12 months without a period or by doing blood work showing us that certain levels of hormones are really high and certain levels of hormones are really low. The term perimenopause just means what the hell is going on with my cycles? They're all crazy. I'm having hot flashes, but I'm still having a period, but I can't sleep, but this, but that. And a lot of times it's just a big jumble and a lot of symptoms are happening at the same time. So there is no one way that people go into menopause. So menopause is basically once you hit menopause, it's like a cliff. Your estrogen levels will absolutely nosedive. Your progesterone absolutely nosedives. Your testosterone and other hormones will stay relatively stable, which we'll talk about. But there is not one recipe for how people go into menopause. So like I joke that I'm writing a book about all of this perimenopause that's called Perimenopause is a Pile of Shit and other things my doctor doesn't tell me, because really truly like it can just be a mess for people for a little while. So the first way we approach that is just trying to manage your symptoms so that you're comfortable enough, you're able to sleep, like all of those wonderful and important things. And then we start working up that ladder of intervention. Are there herbs that can help? Are you someone who needs to go straight to hormones because nothing is touching it and you're having 8 hot flashes a night? So that's really kind of like this delicate dance that we manage as you're approaching it, because some people have periods until they're 58. And some people will just stop having a period. And some people will have one period every 4 months for 4 years. Most people, typically, I would say it takes 6 to 12 months to kind of stop having a period. But during that time, a lot of people have real troublesome symptoms. And so, again, I want to be really clear. I use a ton of hormone replacement therapy in my practice, but I tend to really make sure that it's the right tool for the job. And I think that's probably a whole other Facebook Live that we could do on hormones, but I can address some of it today. I am really starting to lean towards, I think in 5 to 10 years, it's going to become standard of care again to use hormones. I think the benefits far outweigh the risks, but that is something that really needs to be managed on an individual basis. And so now we have these two bodies of research. One is like hormones are terrible, you're going to die. And the other is like, you know, hormones might have this beneficial effect. And so we're sort of trapped in our timeline between these two bodies of research. So time will tell where we land on that. And if my opinion changes on it, I will absolutely say that out loud. So I have a question that says, if you haven't had your period for a year, does that automatically mean you're in menopause? So yes, by definition, it means you're in menopause. If there are intervening factors, like if you're in your early 40s, if you are having other symptoms that are concerning, I probably would do blood work just to confirm that. But yes, technically, if you have not had a period for 1 year and you're not someone that typically doesn't have irregular periods or PCOS or something else, that is what that means. So congratulations to you asking that question. I always like to say congratulations because there are awesome benefits of not being beholden to a menstrual cycle anymore, right? Okay, let's see. One other thing that I wanted to talk about. So a couple of PMS symptoms that I wanted to address that are common. A lot of questions that I get are, why the hell are my periods so heavy before I am going into menopause? Like women in their late 40s that are like, I want to be done with my periods. And then their periods are like worse than ever. They're like bleeding through their pants when they're in a meeting, like shit that shouldn't happen to you other than when you're a teenager. So one of the reasons for that, again, if you think about estrogen and progesterone, that they balance each other out. I'm going to show you this image again. So just to be clear with this image, first half of your cycle, more estrogen dominant, second half of your cycle, more progesterone dominant. So what's cool about the way estrogen and progesterone work together is, remember, estrogen is proliferative. It causes that uterine lining to grow and grow and grow. Progesterone counterbalances the estrogen. So they really work like in beautiful balance together. And for women that have a uterus, if we use estrogen replacement therapy, um, and I will address that, Pia, too. When you're using estrogen replacement therapy, you have to use progesterone, because if you don't, you're basically post-menopause causing that uterine lining to grow and replicate, and that is a risk factor for uterine cancer. So we always use them together. Plus, progesterone can just be really nourishing for sleep, too. So heavy menstrual periods, again, if we're talking about progesterone levels decreasing because of that stress, that cortisol kind of stealing the building blocks away from that progesterone, what happens is you don't have a ton of progesterone left and you're really building up that uterine lining heavily. So those are women that I actually do tend to use a lot of progesterone with, just because that is such a miserable thing to experience. And I always say, like, I'm a really disappointing naturopath, because honestly, some women that bleed really heavily as they're approaching menopause, I send them straight to the gynecologist for an IUD or for uterine ablation, which is a way of basically like cauterizing. It sounds horrible, but it's really not. It's not a big deal. But cauterizing the lining of your uterus so you basically just don't bleed. Those little vessels can't bleed anymore, because between the ages of like 47 and 50, having periods like that can be really debilitating. And then you're also becoming iron deficient. That makes your sleep worse. That makes your energy worse. So again, just to readdress women who have very heavy periods as they're approaching menopause, you always want to get a workup from your physician. So obviously, like, you want to get a pelvic ultrasound, you want to see what's going in, always get your iron stores checked, always get your thyroid checked. That's a situation where often if a woman is ovulating, she's probably not making enough progesterone. So we either work on that with herbs and adding some progesterone, or again, I get a little bit of a higher level of intervention on there. I will address weight gain in menopause, because that is like a $1 billion question. There was one other question in here. Are your pregnancies and menopause related? Like, if you had, I might need a little bit more detail about that question if you want to type me more. I would say not necessarily. Like, if you had certain issues during your pregnancies, does that mean your menopause is going to look like X, Y, and Z? I don't think so. Sometimes there can be a commonality between, like, if your mother went into menopause really early, you may be more likely to do that. But if you have more specific questions about that, I can try to answer that. Because of heavy bleeding, I'm assuming that's what you're referring to. I might circle back to that. So that is one of the common PMS symptoms. Mood issues with PMS, particularly as we get a little bit older, that can become more intense. A lot of times with mood issues before the period, I use an herb called chaste tree berry very commonly in my practice for PMS issues for women of all ages. So anytime there's something that has to do with like the shift between before you start your period and starting your period, before you ovulate to after you ovulate, those types of shifts can be really well addressed with chaste tree berry. I really like the Vitanica product. I don't have any like affiliation with anybody, but that's just the one that I use. So I always start there. So if the mood issues are like mild to moderate, I try to manage them symptomatically while we're using that chaste tree, because anytime you do something to affect the menstrual cycle, you always want to give it 3 cycles, because it takes a while for you to show what's going, basically for your cycles to reflect what you're doing. It can take a few cycles. So if that doesn't work, a lot of times I do a ton of mood support. So I would say, like, hormones are a huge part of my practice. And the other big part is mental health, mental wellness, and mental illness. I mean, I really do a ton of work with that. And the hormones and mental wellness, obviously, we know they're like so closely related. So a couple of my favorites for that's like PMS type of mood issues. I use a ton of 5-hydroxytryptophan in my practice. It's a serotonin building block. It's an amino acid, which means it's a protein building block, and it's also one of the main building blocks for serotonin. It's a really nice way of targeting serotonin without having to get meds on board. Again, I have no judgment about meds. I use them in my practice all the time, but I always try to start with something a little lower level of intervention if it's appropriate. And then the other thing I'm using a lot lately in my practice is just really low dose lithium, elemental lithium. And I know that freaks people out because we all think like lithium is like this thing for if you're have bipolar and it causes all these side effects, but that's usually those doses are like 150, 300, 600, 900 milligrams is how they're dosed pharmaceutically. And I'm talking 5 milligrams. Really, really good for irritability and rage and I always giggle about this because I learned about this at a mental health conference that I went to. And the slide, the psychiatrist that was talking put up this slide of like a mom screaming at her kid and like a wife yelling at her husband. And I was like, oh my God, that is totally me. And so that's always the image in my head. But it's kind of like a rage, irritability thing can really be touched nicely by that lithium without a lot of side effects. So those are kind of basics that I start with the cycles. So let's see, sweating with PMS. So that's a very common symptom for some people. And I also think that has to do with the hormone drop off. So somebody just asked a question about that and sweating for 3 nights before the period. So there are a couple things that are going on. You can address that sometimes by adjusting lifestyle factors, which I know does not work for everybody. And all of you guys know that I am a drinker, not a judger. And so I don't like to take people's like magical ceremonies away from them, but I find a lot of people in menopause and also PMS that more alcohol, particularly red wine during those time periods are not very well managed. So it can really trigger heat and hot flashes for people. So again, getting the herbs on board, sometimes a little bit of progesterone cream can really help, like even if you're in your late 30s, early 40s. So those are things that kind of have to be troubleshot on an individual basis. But I do like that progesterone cream for those types of symptoms because with the sweating, a lot of times that's a real hormonal drop off. The other thing that I would consider is acupuncture, which I know a lot of you out there are probably already doing, and you who asked the question, you probably already do it. But acupuncture is awesome for addressing symptoms like that are really like heat based or cold based. A lot of times you can really put a dent in it with acupuncture. So I know those aren't like quick and dirty questions. Sweating for a couple of nights before your period is not a horrifying, scary sign to me, particularly if it's cyclical. Like if you're 40 and you're sweating every night, that's concerning and you need blood work and you need to be worked up by your doctor. But if it's really cyclical, typically it just has to do with that shift. So I would probably start by adding chase treeberry 2 capsules every day throughout the whole entire cycle and give that 2 or 3 cycles to see how you do. Back off of the red wine, that kind of stuff. I find a lot of women are a lot more sensitive to like sugar and carbs and alcohol right before the onset of their period, which is absolute bullshit because that's basically all we want. It's our Corona vacation diet. But that's one thing just to be extra aware of as well. Okay. Do postmenopausal hot flashes ever cease? Oh my God, I wish there were a magical answer. The thing about menopause and menopausal symptoms, again, is that everybody is different. And so some people always have them to some degree. Some people can have them for 20 years. You, very healthy person asking that question, yes, they do cease eventually, but I would say that nobody has a timeline for what that looks like. The average length of menopausal symptoms is 5 to 10 years. So, but there are a lot of tricks for that. Again, one of my first go-to herbs for that is black cohosh, which I know I put a lot of people on, but I like to dose it really high to see if it touches those hot flashes. That's always my first line because it doesn't tend to have any side effects. I don't even see like breast tenderness or anything like that with it. But so typically I'll put people on a really high dose of black cohosh to start, and I give it 5 to 7 days to see if it will put a dent in symptoms. So I'll have people do like 3 capsules twice a day of that Vitanica black cohosh. And I have people do that for a couple weeks, see how you do. And I'm getting a lot of sad faces because of the timeline of menopause. I just want to say that's an average. That doesn't mean that's going to be any of you. But so black cohosh, 3 capsules twice a day, really hit it hard for a couple of weeks. If that doesn't do anything, then we move on to sort of higher levels of intervention. Some people do great with maca capsules for hot flashes. I don't use a ton of maca right away because it does have some progesterogenic effect. But again, I love the hormones postmenopausally. So There are great hormonal and non-hormonal options. If you're looking at a higher level of intervention, some of my patients out there who have been through breast cancer treatment and are not supposed to take any hormones. Gabapentin is a great medication that can work beautifully for hot flashes at night. I know people don't love to take pharmaceuticals, but it is a really awesome option. And yes, somebody just mentioned rhubarb. Okay, so there is a great product called Estrovera that's made by Metagenics. I don't use a lot of this product, not because it's bad or anything, but just because I like happen to use other tools. But some people really swear by it. So that's a rhubarb product that people absolutely love for hot flashes also. So I would say if you're not going to do hormonal options, the top three would be black cohosh, maca, and then that rhubarb product from Metagenics. It's called Estrovera. Those are all good options to try. And again, like you work your way through those, you give each one a couple of weeks to see how you do. And if you're not getting improvement, then we certainly can talk about hormonal options. Hot flashes almost always are just that estrogen cliff dive. And so adding a little bit of estrogen can make a really big difference for people. And the thing about hormone replacement therapy that's important to remember also is that you don't go on HRT and then like you have to take it forever. Like you could take it for a couple of months and give yourself a little bit of relief, and then you could take a break from it or stop forever. There's not a lot of harm in doing that. The most benefit that we see with hormone replacement is when you begin it within the first 3 to 5 years of going into menopause, officially being diagnosed with menopause, particularly for things like bone density maintenance and disease prevention. But really, like, we're starting to see long-term research on people that have been on these hormones for like 10, 15, 20 years. And so you can use them for as long as you need to use them. And of course, I want all of you to discuss that with your doctors because I don't want to make recommendations to people that aren't my patients. But yes, to answer your question, the rhubarb has some really good research on it. I would say it doesn't work as well for people as some of the other tools I use, which is maybe why I like go through fits of using it and then I stop for a while and then I'll use it for a while again. It's really individual what people respond to. I wish I had a better way of predicting that, but everybody's a little bit different. And those of you who know me know that I still think genetic testing out there is a big money pit that you can pay people to tell you what's going to work for you, but I still don't think it's really applicable. So another really good question, hair loss during menopause. This is such a good one. Thank you for bringing this up. Okay, so here's what's really interesting. We talked about estrogen and progesterone nose diving during menopause, right? Once you're done ovulating, you're not making any progesterone. So your serum progesterone levels will be really, really low. Estrogen also tends to dive off a cliff. So even though like it'll go a little bit more like this, it happens pretty quickly. Like within 12 to 24 months, your numbers will really tank. So what's interesting is that you make testosterone. Women make testosterone. We make it in our adrenal glands, and we make it basically from the same building blocks that we make our cortisol. So again, here's your cholesterol. I haven't looked at this. Okay, so here's your testosterone. So again, same main building blocks as your cortisol and your progesterone. The same building block is used to produce also testosterone, which is going to be made in your adrenal glands. And what's interesting about the hair loss is a lot of times what happens for women is because their estrogen tank, because estrogen and testosterone use a lot of the same carrier proteins being circulated in your blood. So all of a sudden you have way less estrogen. Guess what's going to look like? It's being way more active, and that's usually testosterone. So when you're getting that kind of thinning on the top, this is, by the way, a skin cancer scar. This is not testosterone hair loss. But when you're getting a lot of that kind of thinning on the crown of your head, you'll see a lot of women where all of a sudden right here is where you see their hair thinning. That almost always is a testosterone issue. And what happens is it basically just looks like you have a ton of testosterone activity, but really it's because the estrogen's not there to balance it out. So you address that in one of a couple of ways. You either have to block the testosterone activity or you have to add some estrogen to balance it out. Most women at that point, you can use saw palmetto to block that testosterone. That's an herb that can help. Basically, it blocks testosterone's breakdown product, which is the thing that's stimulating those hair follicles. It doesn't work as well, but it does work fine for some people. I use a medication called spironolactone sometimes for that. It originally was a diuretic, but it works really, really nicely for that. Like testosterone, someone will, when they go into menopause, not only do they get the hair thinning, but they start to get acne and a lot of unwanted facial hair. That's that testosterone that just is like basically all the buses are being filled up with testosterone and delivered everywhere instead of being partially filled up with estrogen. But again, because I tend to use more hormone replacement therapy with people, a lot of times just adding estrogen really, really helps with that. And for those of you that are on hormone replacement therapy, I also want to remind you that different delivery mechanisms of estrogen will do different things. I use a lot of patches. I use a lot of oral, but if you are given oral estrogen for the same reasons, because estrogen and testosterone ride in the same bus, if you're given oral estrogen and your libido tanks, you need to make sure your doctor is prescribing testosterone for you, because what happens is that estrogen basically like that overpowers the testosterone activity, and testosterone is really important for us also for libido and like maintaining our lean muscle mass. So it's a little bit of a balancing act. Again, with the hair, there are two other things that I want you guys to always think about. One is that a lot of women experience thyroid issues during menopause. I would say for most women, this is an optimization issue. Like, will you die if we don't put you on thyroid hormone? Probably not from that reason. But sometimes because you have to have good estrogen activity to actually convert your thyroid hormone to active thyroid hormone, which is the hormone that does all the good stuff for our metabolism and our hair and our skin and make us poop and be warm enough and energy and all that good stuff. A lot of times without enough estrogen, that thyroid hormone is not being converted properly, and those functions can really slow down. That really affects the hair too. So sometimes people need a little bit of thyroid as well. And then the third thing with regards to the menopausal hair loss is to think about if this is a person that has had heavy menstrual bleeding before they started menopause, that iron loss can really affect the hair function as well. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay, so another issue that I really wanted to address that I think is important is to just revisit the stress issue. And then the last thing I'm going to touch on when we're done here is just talking about hormone replacement and like what you want to think about if you are considering it. So we talked about basically the whole idea that stress hormones are really, really going to affect, and I will address bioidentical and what I use. One other thing on the hair. Thank you. Somebody's commenting about biotin, collagen products, and this other product that I use in my practice called Regenemax, which is basically like collagen building blocks. So collagen is a really hot product right now, and I know biotin, everyone's like biotin, biotin, biotin. I've never seen biotin turn people's hair, skin, and nails around. And if I'm wrong, if it works for you, great, love that. Um, Anytime something becomes really popular in the supplement industry, you know that I roll my eyes and I like immediately stop carrying it because I get angry about things that are trendy. And that may mean that I need more counseling. But the thing with collagen is that it is, I think, a little bit more of a digestible protein for people. So I think some of the benefit that people are getting from collagen is just that they're able to utilize those protein building blocks a little bit more easily. And so if it works for you, great. I would say do 20 grams of collagen protein daily for 3 months and see what you notice. I also have been using this product called Regenemax. It's made by Zymogen. I actually do use this product because I'm obviously needing some hair regrowth right now. But I take 2 of those daily, and I do find that it really helps strengthen my nails and that it helps with my hair growth. I don't think it's going to be a miracle for everybody, and everyone's really different in what they respond well to. So I would try it and see what you notice. But again, I would give whatever you do 3 months to see. And someone's commenting, she uses the Regenemax with another product I carry. It's called Luminous, and I use these 2 together. Luminous is by Vitanica. Also, can you tell I love Vitanica products? Again, no affiliation. But Luminous is basically just like a combination product. It's got a bunch of herbs and a bunch of nutrients, all of which have been well researched. So it's kind of like instead of taking 8 different bottles of things, you're using as a combo. And I have used this with the Regenemax, so 2 of each every day with food for a period of 3 months to see if we can get people's hair regrowing. And some people respond really nicely to that. And if you want to layer collagen on top of that, I really like that also. I don't know anything about strontium. There was a question about strontium. Other than for bone health, I use that in combination products for bone health, particularly post-menopause. Bone health post-menopause is like a whole other issue too that we could get into. But okay, so stress and menopause, just wanting to remind you guys how important it is to nourish. So it's kind of like when you look at this flow chart, if you can nourish the demand for stress hormones, you're going to ease up the pressure on all of the other hormone production. So if you think about it this way, like if you can lower your stress level, if you can get 1 extra hour of sleep per night, like a lot of us, I see this every day. We stay up an extra hour or two after everybody else in our family goes to bed because we just want to be alone for a little while, not have anybody talk to us and ask us for snacks and anything like that. I've happened to be doing a lot of late night jigsaw puzzling TV watching lately. But those extra hours of sleep are really important. That is when our bodies do so much regenerative work. And so if you're starting to feel stressed or you're having a lot of those hormonal issues, working on nourishing your hormonal cycles just by adding a little bit of extra sleep can make a huge difference. Trying to become less of a yes person. If you're someone where like you volunteer, like I see this all the time. I have patients that are really drained, doing everything for everyone. And then like as soon as they start to feel better with their adrenal function and their cortisol production, they start volunteering for more stuff. So the first thing that I say is please be really conscious about like if you start to feel better, give yourself 3 months before you say yes to anything else. Again, really trying to nourish those stress hormones. And then there are a lot of ways we can supplement to help with stress hormones. A lot of good supplements out there, everything from herbs to like actually adding glandular supplements that have cortisol in them. And all of those things have a good place. Again, it's something you kind of want to troubleshoot with your doctor. Um, okay, so increased irritability. This is a good question, a really good question. Um, crap. Increased irritability right now just seems super healthy and normal to me. I'm not gonna lie. But yes, a couple of things. One is I think that it can be related to hormonal shifts for sure. So just because you may not officially be in menopause where like you're not making that estrogen anymore and you're not making that progesterone anymore, that doesn't mean that your levels might be a little bit lower. And again, that's something like, especially if the irritability is kind of cyclical, that we would start to think about adding some herbs to help balance that cycle out. Again, that 5-HTP, that lithium, getting some of those relaxing herbs on board. Our lives are pretty demanding. And it's like, even if you're single and you don't have any kids, if you're a yes person and you work really hard at your job and you're taking on a lot of extra work, it's like a couple years of a really demanding job, especially in this day and age when we never turn off our phones and our computers. So we're basically working 24 hours a day. That is not how we're designed to live. And so I think irritability can sometimes be a reaction to basically wanting to say, I need to be left alone for a little while, which is a very legitimate place to be, in my opinion. And again, I think one of the things that's interesting that's happening with this quarantine is, well, one of two things. One is some of us who work and are able to work online are working more hours, longer hours, because basically there's no longer that divide. So I really encourage you to, those of you who are working from home, like encourage your team to agree upon a set off time because we're not designed to work 24 hours a day. I mean, our bodies are designed to work with the light and basically when the sun goes down for us to be resting. So, I mean, I know that's kind of an oversimplification, but we are animals. You know what I mean? Like that's what that's what the animals in the animal kingdom do. Um, I lost my train of thought. Oh, and then the other thing is that I think some of us are getting more rest and starting to see that actually more rest is maybe better for us. So that's something that I would also really consider. And also making sure that your rest is nourishing and making sure that your rest is restorative because it's like if you're snoring or if your partner snores, if your cat's waking you up, like our cat, we have 2 cats in heat in our house right now. It is the most ridiculous thing you've ever seen. It's like having a crying baby 24 hours a day. It's like if your sleep is being interrupted in that way, that is definitely something to consider that could be contributing to irritability also. So, okay, there was one more question. Okay, so let's talk a tiny bit about hormone replacement therapy and menopause and other options if you can't or don't want to do hormone replacement therapy. Again, I am moving towards using a little bit more hormones in my practice. I'm feeling very confident about the health benefits long term. I don't think everybody needs to use them. I don't judge people if they don't use them and I don't push them on people, but I just want people to know that they're an option. I use a lot of, I use, so bioidentical means the hormone that you're taking is identical to the hormone that you would be making in your body. So the two hormones that I supplement the most are estradiol, which is the main estrogen that we use in our bodies, and progesterone. Now, there are A lot of other forms of estrogen, for example, Premarin that we can think of. Premarin has like 16 different estrogens in them. And one of the issues about negative effects from using that historically, I think is because we don't make a lot of those metabolites, so we don't need them. I only use estradiol and progesterone and sometimes a different type of estrogen vaginally if we need it. I always start with a patch of estrogen and an oral pill of progesterone, or if it's too expensive or you get a rash, we do an oral estrogen with the oral progesterone. Progesterone should always be dosed at bedtime because it can really help nourish the sleep. Estrogen, I really don't care what time of day you take it. Remember that if you're being given oral estrogen in menopause, if you care about your libido, you probably should be using a testosterone cream. The estrogen and progesterone I use comes from a regular pharmacy. You don't have to compound it, in my opinion. I will compound it if people do not tolerate the regular pharmaceutical forms. Do I want my patients to be tethered to the pharmaceutical industry? No, but do I think these are really good tools sometimes? Yes, I absolutely do. And so again, you always have to weigh those questions. So testosterone, I use it as a cream. I use a compounding pharmacy. We have a great one here in Issaquah. We've got a great one up in Snoqualmie. Mail order pharmacies, like it's really easy to do, but that's usually the only one you will pay out of pocket for. If you cannot tolerate or cannot use hormone replacement therapy, but you're just like dying from hot flashes post-menopause, there are two medications that I use for that specifically. One is gabapentin. It's a little bit of a higher level of intervention. I don't like love it long term for people, but it's a really good tool for sleep. And I'm such a big believer in sleep. So again, like you're going to get scared by everything you take if you look on the internet. This is the horrible thing that's going to happen to you, but maybe using something for a month so you can like get back on your feet and get some solid sleep. I find that incredibly valuable for people. So I just want to remind you that try not to characterize things as all good, as all bad. And that includes supplements. So like supplements are not a panacea. Just because something is natural and made by a supplement company doesn't mean it's better quality, going to work better, safer for you, going to cure your cancer, like any of those things. I really, really, really try to shy away from health claims about supplements and also pharmaceuticals. One other medication that I will talk about for hot flashes is venlafaxine. Venlafaxine is also called Effexor. It's an antidepressant, but it's an SNRI. So an SSRI really focuses just on serotonin. SNRI will also affect norepinephrine. So what I like about this medication is it's been shown to be helpful for menopausal hot flashes. And it can also really help with stuff like lowered libido and mood issues that can come along with that. It's not perfect for everybody, but it's a great tool to consider. So you definitely are going to have those options kind of in your toolbox. Can you recommend something if your partner snores? Divorce. Sorry, but no, I'm just joking. Yes, I would say have your partner work with his or her doctor on the snoring. There are a lot of things you can do. You can use nasal sprays. You can lower their dairy intake. We could do like dietary changes to see if that affects inflammation. A lot of things we can do on that, but I don't have any magic bullet on that. I'm so sorry. Another question I'm seeing is sometimes I feel a heady buzz or jittery with 5-HTP, even with the correct dose. You know what? Then I probably would switch you to something else. Some people get side effects from SSRI medications. I don't often see it from 5-HTP. So if you took 5-HTP from a good source, which I'm snobby, so there are certain companies I really like. I use the Thorne 5-HTP. If you're sure it's like from a clean source and even 50 milligrams twice a day gives you that feeling, I probably would switch to something else. If you're jittery with it, my concern would be that you're probably converting it into something else. And so the other thing I would maybe have you consider is dosing your 5-HTP with a really high dose B complex, because you need those B vitamins, especially methylated B vitamins, to help you make serotonin out of that 5-hydroxytryptophan. Like there are a bunch of steps, the tryptophan gets converted to 5-hydroxytryptophan, that gets converted to this, so all of those steps require these little helpers. And the B vitamins are really, really important for that. Someone brought up, so then I would say, try it with cofactors, make sure you're taking a clean dose. If that's not working any for you, then I would say, let's consider something